The war on drugs is the last dying smell from the Nixon administration. This isn't a war, it's a misuse of the word. It's an apparatus of control. You can tell it all, by the way, by the name they give to the person who's in charge of this mad scheme, a czar. But the czar is exactly the right name for this program and for this mentality.
Get smaller.
It's absolutist, it's unquestionable, it's fanatical, and it's corrupt.
What keeps this thing going is the government, especially the federal government and organizations like the Partnership for Drug-Free America, their willingness to spend hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, taxpayer dollars oftentimes, on propaganda. Putting out propaganda in every case that's essentially an ounce of truth embedded in a pound of lies and bull and exaggeration.
Want to get high? No way, man. That stuff's for losers.
The creation of the media campaign was an enormous achievement in our office. Oh, the legalizers were livid. You can't fight drugs by TV. Guess what? Everybody advertises on TV, whether it's Coca-Cola, to political campaigns, to the value of being drug-free and the dangers of using drugs like marijuana.
Man, watch out!
And it worked. We had some very effective ads. There was a 13% reduced proclivity of kids to use drugs when they saw the ad that had the actor smashing the dishes. We had another very good ad that had, my mommy talks to me about everything. This was a little girl. And she talks to me about this and that and this and that. And what does your mother say to you about drugs? Dead silence. Those are my two favorite ads that I thought were enormously powerful.
This absurd continuation of this prohibition is largely a function of ignorance. In 1967, because I was so concerned about this drug marijuana, I decided to do a review of the literature. I was then persuaded by Harvard University Press to do a book. The book came out in 1971, Marijuana Reconsidered. I learned that what was being said about this drug was mythological. You couldn't find the data to really support it. It turns out that marijuana came across as a remarkably non-toxic drug. Cannabis is a plant. Now, in the plant, there are somewhat more than 60 molecules called cannabinoids. THC is the most active. THC stands for tetrahydrocannabinol. People find smoking marijuana very useful for a whole host of symptoms. And if you inhale it, you get the effect within a very short period of time. So you can titrate it. By titrate it, I mean you can take just enough to get rid of your symptoms and stop.
The government hates to admit that they've already acknowledged that marijuana is a medicine. They acknowledged it in the 1970s and 80s when they allowed dozens of Americans to receive a monthly supply of marijuana from the government's marijuana farm at the University of Mississippi. Some of those people are still alive and still obtaining it today, their monthly canister of marijuana.
Why has marijuana not been approved medically? Because it's not medicine. It's been anecdotal evidence. Well, you know, I could take this glass and fill it with gin and drink some and say, hey, I feel good. And that's about what medical marijuana is. The 4 or 5 people that you've talked to, well, of course they're biased toward it, but that's like asking the generals in Iraq, how's the war going? You know, you're not getting an objective forest for the trees kind of an appraisal from those people. You have to look at science, not politics, to define what is safe and effective medicine in America. I hope you catch that soundbite. That's all right.
Certainly, it's possible that the 9-year-old occasionally might get stoned, and that would be more likely than it has been until now. But the problem is that we have to weigh what kind of damage we want to tolerate. And for me, an America where there was a certain danger that people might experience drugs who don't under the current regime would be preferable to one where drugs are criminalized, because the problem is that once you criminalize drugs, then you create an underground economy where drugs command a much greater price than they would otherwise because of the danger, the illegality in handling them and selling them. And as a result, you have certain communities that are vulnerable to ending up depending on that particular economy.
I think the real difference is that during the 1920s and early 30s, when Americans started talking about repealing alcohol prohibition, most of them could still remember what it was like when alcohol was legal. They could imagine it. The problem we have today is that none of us have grown up in a world in which marijuana was legal, was regulated, was sold in shops and taxed. So the change is more difficult to make because we can't picture it, we can't imagine it. And in some respects, I think it's that lack of imagination of the fact that we could just make it legal and the world would not crumble.
Committee will come to order.
I don't know any thinking person in Washington, D.C. who thinks this should go on, this insane campaign against marijuana. You never meet anyone who's actually in favor of it. But everybody thinks it has to go on because they think everyone else wants it to. In the end, the absurdity of this will tell. The spell will be broken.
I think they might be voting right now. They're voting right now.
If we could find a politician who had initially the guts, but most importantly the intelligence to see that this is the case and make it a subject, it would immediately become the next big thing. And we would shake ourselves and wonder how and why it had taken us so long to see where our own best interests lay.
Amendment offered by Mr. Hinchey of New York.
This amendment simply has to do with the ability of states to relieve the suffering of their citizens without federal intervention and the right of states to pass laws regulating medical practice without federal intervention. Balance of my side.
That was good.
Mr. Chairman, I rise today in strong opposition to the Hinchey Amendment. Let's be clear, marijuana is not harmless, as some claim. And the message we're sending to our children today is very strong. Whether we support legal use of marijuana as a precursor to methamphetamines to heroin, this is the message we'll be sending if we approve this. I strongly urge my colleagues to vote against this amendment.
I rise in strong support of the amendment. Our coalition of freedom-minded Republicans and Democrats on this issue is based on compassion for those who are suffering, a commitment to personal liberty, and a firm belief in the principles of federalism.
Nice. Great.
If I'm terminally ill, it isn't anybody's business on this floor how I handle the pain or the illness or the sickness associated with that illness.
I rise to oppose this amendment. I had young people work for me in my supermarket who I knew were using marijuana, and they used it for a period of years, folks, and they're not as sharp after years of marijuana use as they would have been. It dulls the brain. It holds back the growth. I have close friends and even relatives who are living less of a life than they would have if they hadn't spent years abusing marijuana. Marijuana is a dangerous drug that is not adequately respected by the young people of this country because they've been seduced by leaders in this country advocating that it's a perfect, wonderful drug.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Mr. Chairman, the arguments that have been put forth against this amendment have nothing to do with this amendment. This amendment has nothing to do with legalizing marijuana. It has to do with two simple things: being compassionate for people under the lawful provisions of laws passed in their states and the states' rights. This Congress should recognize states' rights, live up to the provisions of the Constitution, and pass this amendment.
A sufficient number has risen and a recorded vote is ordered.